But Cartesian, we were basically talking about why people believe, and of course, as part of the two-parter, we want you to basically discuss, your reasons for believing, and then we'll move on to aspiring philosophy. I'll just, can I call you IP?
That's perfectly fine. Most people do anyway.
Okay, then we'll start with you, Cartesian, then we'll move on to IP, and then I guess we'll go from there. So, if Cartesian, if you wish to go first, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, cool. Well, I haven't really got a speech worked out or anything like that, but obviously to set the context, this was I asked to, or I think I wrote on the thread, didn't I, first of all, to one of the videos that was about, what is faith for religious people. There'd been a lot of suggestion in one of your previous programs that faith is predominantly an emotional thing, and because it's based in emotion, some people were saying anyway, or seemed to be suggesting that invalidates it in some way. And I just wanted to make the point that actually, I mean, for certainly most of the theists that I know and that I have read, now all I can talk about this evening is my own religious tradition, which is Christianity. And certainly within that tradition, the majority of that tradition, if you exclude maybe one or two philosophers, especially Kierkegaard, most of the Christian philosophers of the last 2,000 years have always spoken very, very well of the relationship between faith and reason, and in fact that actually faith and reason overlap with each other. So I think, first of all, I wanted to make the point that faith for certainly most Christians that I know and for myself is something that means much, much more like the word trust, which is, of course, what you will find in the dictionary as well. So it's not, sort of like Mark Twain's idea that faith is believing what you know ain't so. And that's a famous quote, isn't it, from Mark Twain, or someone like Richard Dawkins who says that faith is like believing something in the teeth of the evidence or against all the evidence. So in other words, basically you're deluding yourself in some way, and that's not what faith actually means. So if you go back through Christian philosophers like St. Augustine, Aquinas, Descartes, Locke, and many, many others, you get this idea that actually faith is something which is based on some reasonable beliefs, and obviously there's a lot of overlap between the word belief and faith. And so that was really the first point that I wanted to make, was that this idea that faith is an emotive thing and that it lacks any intellectual integrity is something that I don't recognize that at all from having read many, many Christians on this issue. And faith is something which is about trusting God, because there are good reasons to trust in God. Now, of course, that would then lead on to a discussion about what many of those reasons are, and I think there are lots of reasons why someone might think that there is a God. But I think that first point that I wanted to make was about what the nature of faith really is. So that's kind of where I wanted to start, and
Oh
I'm
yeah,
quite
we
happy
yeah
for you
we
to come back on that.
yeah we can start from there if you like. If you want to continue from that point, you're more than welcome to. If not, then IP, if you want to go, you're more than welcome to.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would just probably just want to build on what CT was talking about. Basically, I don't think I've ever. I mean, a lot of Christians will say they had like this experience with God or whatnot, and that's why they believe, and that it just relates to to their own personal experiences. Personally, for me, it was never really along that lines. I just began studying one day and eventually picked up on the idea and started looking at the conclusions of what these many theistic philosophers were saying, and eventually became a Christian on that basis. But I remember a quote from Dr. John Lennox that's kind of stuck with me, and he's talking about faith, and he's answering this question here: is faith blind? Do you believe because of lack of evidence? Do you rejoice when there is no evidence? And he says, if you look up in an English dictionary, you will find that faith, belief, and trust are all related to each other. Now, we do not at the ordinary level of life put our faith in people unless there is evidence. The financial crisis recently is one of the staggering examples. We thought we could trust the bankers, and the whole financial system froze. Why? Because they couldn't gain back the trust. Why? Because they couldn't produce the evidence. And Dr. Lennox's basic point is that you really, on our basic level of life, we don't really put our faith in people unless there's evidence. So the idea that theists, specifically Christian theists, would believe in God just because or without any evidence is kind of contrary to what I have become to believe and what I've come to find, especially along with reading a lot of the philosophers through Christianity.
All right then. All right then. All right. I do want to go back, and then after I comment, we can go on to negation. And after that, it's practically a free for all. As far as now, you say that this would not be emotionally tied because it's all about building trust, and building that trust would be relying on evidence in order to support to be the foundation of that trust. Is that what you're saying, Inspiring?
I would say yes. A lot of the, I mean, I could show good support for that. Yeah, of course, that a faith comes from evidence. It doesn't just come from blind faith or the opposite of what that would be.
All right, so you would say that yours and Cartesian, you can obviously answer this as well, that your trust or your belief is backed by a foundation of evidence, correct?
Are you asking me or CT?
Both. Either one of you can answer.
All right, then, yes, I would say my faith in God is definitely backed by evidence.
All right, then, Cartesian?
Yeah, and I want to add something to this here. This is a very, very thorny issue in philosophy, especially in the area of the theory of knowledge, epistemology. So the question here is, I don't want to get tied to what's called evidentialism, especially what's been called strong evidentialism. Now, strong evidentialism is the view that everything that I believe, I must have some evidence for it. Now, there are huge problems with that, and most philosophers today do not hold to strong evidentialism anymore. Because all of us, if you think about it, all of us, it doesn't take long to think about the fact that every single one of us, probably all of us in here agree that we have beliefs for which we do not have evidence. However, with that caveat in place, I would be willing to grant that I do have reasons for believing, and I would consider those reasons to be good evidences for believing. But at the same time, I don't want to get caught into having to say that everything that one believes must have evidence for believing, and especially I want to draw a distinction between evidence and proof as well.
All right.
And real quick, just to, I think for the viewers more than anybody, CT, if you could expand on that and give us an example of what you would see as a belief that is not based in evidence, I think that'd be really helpful for the audience.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think your first program was on solipsism, wasn't it?
Yes, it
Am
was.
I right?
Yes, solipsism, correct.
I have to admit, I didn't hear all of that. I think I heard about the first 15, 20 minutes. And I think there was, at least if I remember rightly, there was this frustration that it would be very hard to demonstrate to somebody who is a solipsist that you exist. So, for example, the belief that you and I this evening are not discussion in the matrix, that is something that which we believe. Now, we can't give certainly not strong evidence. We might have a few reasons to think that, and probably one of them would be about the burden of proof. But that aside, it's not like we can demonstrate. We certainly can't demonstrate that we're not in the matrix. Mm-hmm. Yet we think it's more reasonable to start on the assumption that at least things are the way we perceive them to be, the principle of credulity, as Richard Swinburne calls it. So we believe that things are the way they seem to be, and so that we do actually exist. So we believe that, but we don't have evidence, and certainly not in the sense of having strong evidence that we're not in the matrix.
All right. If you say that it is things, or there's some things that you hold that you don't necessarily have evidence for, what then would you call the backing of your faith? If the backing of the faith was evidence, and if you subtract the evidence from that, would your faith still be supported by what?
I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying that my faith does that. I'm agreeing that I think I have good reasons, which I would then use the word evidence for, because I think evidence can be good reasons, that I do have evidence for being a theist. I just wanted to distinguish myself from what's called evidentialism, and that is the view that one must have evidence for all of one's beliefs.
Well, yeah, if you subtract the evidence, that's what I'm asking. If you subtract the evidence from your belief foundation, what then would still be supporting your belief in a god or gods, depending on if you're monotheistic or whatever?
Well, that question doesn't apply to me, but I think such a person would, traditionally, you would call them a fideist, someone who has either no reasons for believing what they believe, or they believe things contrary to reasons not to believe, would generally be labelled a fideist. But as I say, that virtually applies to no Christian philosophers. I mean, the obvious one is Soren Kierkegaard. Everyone brings up Kierkegaard when fideism is talked about, but even then scholars disagree as to exactly how fideistic he was. So really he's a marginal case within Christian philosophy. So yeah, I don't believe that applies to my own position.
All right. Well, you said that there's some things that you hold that you don't necessarily have evidence for. And so basically, what would be the supporting foundation for your belief? Because you yourself said this, that, there are some things I hold to that I don't necessarily have evidence for. For example, the solipsism. But at the same time, I don't take a position on the solipsism. It may or may not. I just happen to assume past it and just assume that U, negation, and IP are not just a figment of my imagination. And, I just assume past it. But to have a actual position, I could not really hold that position on anything other than my own wants and desires. But then that's not really a good foundation to support something that you find to be true. So if you subtract, like I said, the evidential part of it, what then is left to support your theism?
Well, this is where we're both on the same page, because basically what we need to do in order to move forward in the discussion is we need to agree that we're starting on the assumption that the world is real and that you and I do exist, and that we didn't come into existence 2 minutes ago with all of our memories put in place. We come to this whole discussion all the basis of making some assumptions for which we don't have strong evidence to the contrary of. And I think I would argue that's true of all four of us in here. So we're granting each other those things.
Maybe I could kind of clear this up, is that I don't think any of us, in fact, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be on this call if we were solipsists. Maybe you can, I think that we're getting to the point where we're kind of getting almost to the point of defining evidence versus proof. Even though we can't prove we're not in the matrix, all of us believe we're not, and I'm going to argue more toward the evidentialist side, in that the reason we don't believe that is because of the evidence that we find, the reaction of the world that we perceive around us, and that. So I guess the question that I would like to pose here is just to understand why you don't believe you're in the matrix. If it's not based on evidence, what would you call that, and what reasons could you give for not believing we're in the matrix right now?
Well, I would first of all turn your statement back on you and say, well, you would cite the world around you as evidence that you're not in the matrix, but that is based on an assumption. You're assuming that the world around you is really the world around you. So your reason for believing it.
Right. What I'm assuming is that from what my sensory inputs, if you will, all of my senses are telling me, which by all accounts could be completely flawed. I absolutely grant that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But again, I think we're splitting hairs. I think that for me to say that I know that they're not flawed, I would have to give some proof. I'm not saying that that's proof. I'm saying that based on my perception, based on my reaction, and I'm saying involuntary action to the world around me, it gives validity to my belief that I'm not in a matrix. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not in a matrix, but I'm saying I'm going to act as if I'm not based on the evidence that has been provided to me from what I perceive as outside sources. And what I'm saying is that the difference between knowing I'm not in the matrix would be a proof versus reacting as if I'm not in a matrix would be evidence. And my question to you is you don't believe you're in a matrix basically for the same reason that I don't, because we do have, using that terminology, evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, I want to try and clear this up slightly. You asked for an example of something which we have to believe, and we believe it on the basis of not having, a huge amount of evidence for it. Now, I would come back and say you can't use the evidence of the external world as evidence that the external world really exists. The reason you can't do that is because that is still based on the assumption that that world really is a real world. So you're trusting all your senses, which of course is begging the whole question of whether the senses are reliable for truth, whether they actually tell us about the world around us, whether they tell us that the world is real or not. All of those things have to be assumed. So basically that's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing for solipsism here in any sense whatsoever.
Right,
All
I
I'm
don't think
saying
any of
is...
us are. What I'm saying is why don't you, is because you do find evidence, regardless if you can put 100%, proof, you can say that is 100% proof, you still are going to react as if it is proven based on the evidence that you have been provided.
Yep. The best way that I have been able to hear a definition about the whole solipsism issue is that it's just the atheism of reality, the atheism of outside your own mind. So you don't claim to know whether it's true or whether it's false. Just like me as an atheist, I don't claim to know whether God does exist or whether God does not exist. If you're traveling down a fork, or you're traveling down a road and you get to a fork in the road, and one road leads to God 100% does exist, and the other road goes down to what God 100% does not exist, I'm not going down either one. I haven't been convinced down which path is the right one to take. But you calling yourself a theist and arguing for God, you've obviously chosen a path to go down. Now, what we're actually trying to find out is why did you choose that path, rather than being skeptical and just said, let me think about this for a sec. Just like when you talk about reality, we're not saying that reality actually exists. We're just saying that reality is putting on a better show than solipsism in itself, just our own mind could ever. I'm sorry, this world is just too entertaining to ignore. But when you talk about God, God isn't putting on a good show. God isn't making himself apparent for our sensory inputs, just like negation said, to actually spark that sort of maybe so. But obviously, being a theist that you call yourself, you obviously went towards that edge. We're wondering why you went towards that edge, if not for evidence, then of what?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this one, CT.
Sure, go ahead.
I think one of the things, when you're talking about why we went down the road with the evidence, I think what we're doing here is we're confusing empiricism with deductive reasoning. Empiricism is great for learning. We learn a lot from empiricism, and scientific knowledge is, of course, based on empiricism. However, when we prove something in science, we run an experiment 100 times, and if we get the same result 100 times, then it's been empirically proven. But not all learning happens that way, and that's something that I eventually accepted. If we come across a crime scene, we can't look at it all and go, well, I don't know what happened. Let's run the experiment again and just watch empirically to see what happened. We have to deduce the evidence that has been placed in front of us and reach a rational conclusion. that's what happened during the O.J. Simpson trial. The jury deduced the evidence and reached a rational conclusion. Now, many people disagree with that decision. Many people disagree with that decision. And that's what kind of happens when we start deducing the evidence. We come to a rational conclusion and someone say, well, no, I rationally think this instead. Theists, we have looked at the questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Are there morals? And we have said, yes, this is evidence for God, and we're going to deduce this evidence that has been placed here. And it's going to, the most logical conclusion with the evidence we found is that God exists.
I would like to come back to that, with the questions that why is there something rather than nothing, and all these very, very, very good questions in my opinion. When you actually go back into it, these are questions that almost, at the present time at least, cannot be answered. And so rather than, I heard this from a quote from Christopher that said people would rather have a conspiracy theory rather than no theory at all. So before we actually continue, I just want to ask you, are you actually okay with not knowing? Do you have to have an answer for everything when it comes to existence and why the things are the way they are, why the constants are the way they are, and so on?
Well, no, I mean, there's several questions that I could ask myself that I don't need a definite answer for. Like, for instance, I don't know if there's life on other planets yet. Or more specifically, I don't know if there's intelligent life on other planets. That's not really a issue for me. If science decides that down the road, then yes, I could say, okay, yeah, there's life on other planets. That's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, but when it comes to like the beginning of the universe and all these things, basically what I'm going at is that you seem to look at the questions that cannot be answered, which can then be tied to the biblical truths, if we can call it that, and use that as your foundation for the actual beliefs you hold. Would you say that that's a accurate diagram of the circle of life, if you can call it that?
Well, not necessarily. You said questions, and it's kind of like you implied that I look at questions and like, well, there's no answer to these questions, so therefore God did it. And that's not really what theists do. They look at the evidence, and then we say, well, what's the most rational conclusion leading from the evidence? Does God exist? Does God not exist? It's not, I can't answer this question, therefore God did it. That's kind of a God of the gaps. And theism isn't really based on God of the gaps. I'm sure some theists do, and they argue for God of the gaps. But really it's the evidence that we have, and then we build from there.
All right, then. I don't want to leave Cartesian out, and neither negation, so if any of you want to continue on, I can mute my mic real quick. Or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah. Go ahead.
This came up in a previous program as well, and I just wanted to jump in on this point about, this is a question about philosophy of science more than maybe anything else, and that is how we look at the evidence. A lot of philosophers of science today have rejected the idea that the very modernist idea after the Enlightenment, that what scientists do is they dispassionately look at the world around them and describe it in their scientific theories. This is not a popular idea in philosophy of science anymore. The idea that's far more popular is that actually what we do is we admit that we come with a set of assumptions, we come with a worldview, and what we must try and do is allow that worldview and that perspective to be challenged by what we find in the empirical world. But we must not ignore the fact that we all have assumptions. We all come with presuppositions that we make to the evidence, and it's important that we recognize that we have them. But it's a lie to think that we look at evidence, or especially that atheists look at evidence, and therefore they see the evidence so much clearer than a theist sees it. For one, that's an ad hominem attack, which of course would be a logical fallacy, but also it's just not, it's an idea that's completely rejected now in science, especially since Karl Popper and his exposure of this idea of extreme inductivism, that we just come to the evidence with no background knowledge or anything like that. That's just simply not the case. So what we must be willing to do is to reevaluate our presuppositions, our assumptions, our worldviews in the light of the evidence that we come across and the good arguments that we find. So I think that's an important point worth making. So, for example, if a theist finds, for example, I mean, I don't know if this was George Lemaitre's reaction. I doubt it was. But, when he first came up with the idea of the universe having a beginning, which was then labelled as, I doubt that he was saying, my evidence now will demonstrate the existence of God. I've certainly never read anything of him reacting in that way. However, even if he did, that wouldn't change the evidence that he found. So his reaction to it would be completely independent of the evidence that he found. So there might be philosophical implications to his findings, and those can be argued out much later on. But the point is that his own assumptions didn't make the evidence more or less likely. So I think that's something that's worth considering here.
I'm going to have to disagree at least slightly there. My understanding, and I'm not going to rehash everything you said because the viewers can rewind it if they need to, the way I was trained, and just so you know, I do have scientific background and, been fairly well educated, I guess. My understanding of that is the reason that we need to be aware of our preconceptions, pre-ideas, is not to somehow use them to validate the evidence, which it seems like you're almost going that way, but the exact opposite. So when we do attempt to publish a paper, when we do attempt to look at the evidence, we understand that it may be clouded because of our preconceptions and back away before we make judgments and factor in that realization, which it didn't seem like you were getting to. It was more that we have these preconceptions almost to the point where it felt like you'd almost have to accept that regardless what those preconceptions are, they are a valid concern, if you will. And what I mean by a concern there is that it's something that brings us more insight into the evidence, not potentially skews the evidence. And my training has been to that you need to be aware of those preconceptions because you do have a propensity at that point to color the evidence because of preconception.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to clarify, I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying that validates the preconceptions. I never actually said that. All I'm saying is that there is no objective outside of my preconceptions perspective to come from. We all have our preconceived notions, and if we fail to admit that we have them, that's when they can actually become very, very dangerous. So actually, I'm not saying that validates them in any way whatsoever. So, but it might, rightly or wrongly, and that can be left completely open, it might rightly or wrongly inspire a scientist or a philosopher in order to do research in an area where they actually have some preconceived idea. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, Lawrence Krauss was inspired, his whole drive, his inspiration for wanting to discredit the idea that a universe cannot come from nothing. Let's say his underlying reason, his interest in wanting to do that, was his profoundly strong atheism. That, even though it would be interesting and even though it inspires him, that would not discredit his scientific evidence. So I just want to be clear about that. So sometimes people talk that way as if having preconceptions or, you're a theist so you see it that way. That's none of us live in a world where we are objective to evidence. And it's important that we admit that up front. So
in building on that, the atheist philosopher David Hume said many years ago that reason is and ought to be a slave of the passions. And his basic point is that humans are not really just logical creatures. If that was the case, we would agree on everything because we would just go where the what is logical. We tend to force a reason to fit our passions. Everything goes back to our desires in a sense. And I think that's what CT is trying to hit on.
Okay, well, I apologize then because I didn't get that out of your first input, but I see where you're going, and I guess I agree as long as we understand that it should be used to filter our conclusions, not to in any way substantiate those conclusions.
Well, going on the conclusions, I guess, in order for this conversation to move forward, the topic being, why do people believe? And you said there's actually some evidences on it. I forget the exact wording you used, but I guess it was some evidence, some not supported by evidence. Okay, so let's just focus on the evidential evidence, for now. Let's just talk about the evidence. IP, can you at least tell me, what evidence do you have that actually supports your theism?
Well, that's a good question. There's so much to pick from.
Just give me anything.
Well, how about we back up, because I think the easiest way to do this, so that there's plenty of people out there that have stated this many times, that the simplest explanation, especially when we're dealing, putting this out publicly, is probably going to serve the greatest good. I mean, the more people that understand it. So the way that I phrase this question when I'm trying to get answers is that if you could tell your child one thing, your child's 8, 9 years old, and he comes to you and says, I don't think there's God. If you could pick something to tell your child to go look up on the internet, to go research for themselves, to go look for, that would bolster their belief, I should say, what evidence would you provide them? That may make it a little easier and a little simpler.
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to say I guess I can just go with the teleological argument. I've been reading a little bit about that lately. Basically, it's the fine-tuning of the universe. When we look out and we study the cosmos, we begin to see that a lot of the constants which hold the universe together have to fit within a very narrow range, or else the universe would expand too quickly or collapse back in on itself. Now, with that being said, it's interesting to say, like, well, maybe that could have happened by chance, but when you look at something like the cosmological constant, which is finely tuned to 1 part in, I think, 1 to the 120th power, it's very, very hard to think something like that happened by chance. And the only likely things that could have finely tuned it like that are the multiverse or a necessary existing eternal being that exists outside of time, space, and matter. With that being said, if it's the multiverse, well then that's just more nature existing outside of nature. And it doesn't really answer the question, why was the nature that we have finely tuned? It just makes the question bigger. Well, what finely tuned nature? Well, more nature. Well, what finely tuned that nature to finely tune our nature? It gets beyond that. And when you look at that, as Richard Swinburne would say, the most reasonable conclusion is that an intelligent eternal being, that the multiverse would violate Occam's razor in a sort.
Well, do you mind if I take this red line? Or did you want to let Cartesian go?
No. You can go ahead. What we'll do is we'll do this one at a time. So we'll go by 1 point to 1 point, and when I think we're starting to beat a dead horse, I'll move on to Cartesian. Then Cartesian can go after we talk about IP's points. But you can go ahead, negation.
Okay. Well, you brought up Occam's razor, and I mean, there's a couple of rebuttals to this that seem fairly interesting and seem problematic. The first being is that even if I grant, for argument's sake, that we are in a fine-tuned universe, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke said, I believe it was his third rule, that said any advanced civilization or technology would look like magic. How would you explain, let's say that your child comes back and says, Well, you know, Dad, I heard that it wasn't a god. What it was is a very advanced being's third grade science project that their project was to create a universe, and they twiddled the dials and did all of that. So I'd like to hear your reaction to that one. The second one, which seems even more problematic to me, is that you're getting into special pleading where we can't explain it from a naturalistic standpoint because it reduces to an infinite or becomes an infinite regress, but we stop the infinite regress by special pleading with God. So, if you could address those, that would be really helpful, I think.
Sure, I can address that, and then CT can follow behind me. If it's a third grade science project, my first thing I'd point out is get into a little bit of the ontology. I said there had to be a being that separates from space, time, and matter. If such a being was the cause of the universe, then it just is more nature existing outside of nature. This third grade science project really isn't the cause of nature because it has to be part of nature. And that of course, ties into the ontological argument a little bit.
Wait a second.
But the second one I would say is that...
Wait a second, CT. I'm sorry, IP. Why necessarily do you come to the conclusion that this third grader can't be outside nature?
Because this third grader is made of nature. It's made of atoms, particles, and we're asking why did nature come from nothing?
Why can't this being, this group of highly advanced whatever, be outside of our time and space and outside of what we would call nature? I don't understand how you can define that away. What leads you to mandate that?
Well, to borrow from Dr. Craig, if more nature exists outside of nature, then
I'm not
it doesn't
saying
really exist outside nature. I understand. You're asking, like, well, what if some other beings? Well, then I could just ask, well, what created those beings? And it just becomes, as you put it, an infinite regress.
Exactly. So, again, why can't we do that to your God? Because I knew that's where it would end up.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Because we're asking what if we're talking about a maximally great being, a being that is not going to...
Not necessarily. No, my third grader's not maximally great.
No, but you're also not a third grader. So...
You don't know that. There's no way you can make that definitive statement.
Well, let me get to my point. We're talking about God, who is by definition eternal. Now, this is not a being that's made of matter. This is not a being that has to exist in space. This is a being that exists outside of time.
Wait a second. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were using the beginning of the universe to substantiate your beliefs, so this is not about God. It's about the creation of the universe.
I referred to the fine-tuning of the universe. I wasn't directly on the cosmological one.
Okay, but it gets to the same point. It still ends up cosmological, regardless if you want to say fine-tuning or not. But anyway, again, my third grader fine-tune it.
Okay, well, you're back to the third grader. The third grader asked the question, well, why wasn't it my science project, or however you worded it? The simple point of that is, like, we're asking, where did space, time, and matter come from? If space, time, and matter came from something made of matter, then it really didn't come from something else.
Again, and you've made the leap. You've attributed space and time to my third grader, which I'm not making that constraint to my third grader. My third grader is outside time and space.
Then it would have to be outside of matter, and then it would have to be a necessary existing being. So if that's the case, then that being that exists outside of space, time, and matter and is necessary, then that being is the being that we are talking about. So
again, you've made a leap. You've made a leap into it being necessary. I don't understand how you get there either.
Well,
it's necessary for us, but it's not necessary for anything else.
If we're talking about us as in being part of space, time, and matter, the question just comes back to is, why is there something rather than nothing? And I'm confused about what you're trying to ask now.
Yeah, when it comes to where something comes from nothing, now you did hint at the beginning of the universe. You had the beginning of the universe, which fine-tuned the universe to allow intelligent life to begin. We know that something like a God had to create the universe because at the beginning there was no time, there was no space, there wasn't anything. I mean, literally the biggest void you could possibly imagine. So obviously a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, unembodied mind which designed the universe had to be the cause of it. But when you go back far enough, you eventually hit something known as a Planck time boundary. Beyond that, we can't study the universe any further back into the past. That's not to say that that is the limit of space existence. That is just the limit of which we can study it. So to say that there was no time, there was no space, there was no matter is really a leap of faith without any backing, because the Craig's argument works perfectly if the premises were to actually work. But it can be logically valid but not logically sound when you say it that way. I can just as easily say all elephants are pink, negation is an elephant, so that would mean negation is pink. It's logically valid but not logically sound, because again, you're going beyond a boundary that we simply cannot pass, so you have to
wait a second.
put
Redline,
something on it.
Redline, I think we're shifting the goalpost here a little bit, because I'm granting that there was, like I said, for the sake of argument, that IP is right, and there was actually a beginning of the universe, and it was created outside time and space. What I'm trying to get him to explain is how he knows, how he makes the leap, even if I grant him that premise, that it's not a super intelligent race of beings. It's,
I see.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
let's try to stay on point, because if not, we're going to get all over the place.
Then how about this? How about I rephrase it that? All right, knowing all of that, and in the explanation that I gave, how do you get to design rather than we don't know? Let's put it that way.
Can I comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, IP, did you want to say something?
No, you go ahead. It's your turn.
Okay. I think the reason you make that, what you're calling a leap, is what is actually called making an inference to the best explanation. So that is actually what's being done here. Now, of course, someone might call that a leap, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not inferred. So what you have to do is we do this all the time in philosophy, you make an inference to what best explains the data. And this was actually what I wanted to say was, sorry, can I just finish?
Yeah,
this
please.
is what I wanted to say was one of the most important reasons why I believe is because I don't see the issue of giving reasons for the existence of God as on a par with demonstrating that any other object in the universe exists, and that's the way some people approach this. So what evidence would you give that that chair is there, or that you are a real person? The idea of God, I think the best evidence for the idea of God is that when you think about how do we explain the data, so how do we explain, so going back to the question of why there's something at all rather than nothing, and then why is the universe what appears to be so finely tuned in one particular way, and then why does there appear to be meaning to life? Why do we seem to grasp for meaning to life? Why do we believe that truth exists? All of these things, morality, why do we think that morality is objective, which most of us tend to think is true? So when I of those things, that the whole of the human experience, what we would call data, when you look at all of that data, I think you have to ask yourself, well, what is the most plausible hypothesis? Is it that we got lucky? Or is it that there was some, now you might want to call it, Negation of P wants to call this a weak God. Well, he can call it that. I don't mind what he calls the first cause of the universe. If he thinks that's a weak God, then in my view, that's a very strange conception of the word weak. Whatever this being was,
wait a second. When did I say weak God? I'd like to understand where you're putting, because you're putting words in my mouth now, and
okay,
I'm just kind of wondering where I got that from.
What was the label? What was the label? You wanted it to be a lesser God, wasn't it?
No,
so
I didn't give it any God. What I asked for is why, which you have stated at least 3 times now, that your explanation is the best explanation, but you haven't given any reason why it's the best explanation. And that's what I was trying to get with IP, why my third grader is not as good, in fact, could be possibly better if you want to go down Occam's razor, better explanation than your all-powerful God. Why that's a better explanation. Just stating it into being, which it seems like you've done quite a few times, it doesn't hold. So please explain to me why yours is the better explanation.
Yeah, I think in fact, I'm rejecting at this stage, I'm rejecting the temptation to want to have to demonstrate that at this stage you can name this God. I'm not saying Yahweh at this point. I am just saying an incredibly powerful being is the best explanation for the data, that a universe exists, that it was finely tuned. Why? Well, because what are the alternatives? The alternatives, unfortunately, are fairly few and far between. As IP already suggested, if we go the route of a multiverse, we still have the original problem. If it's a multiverse generator, some kind of huge multiverse which generates universes and makes them all slightly different, so there's an infinite number of universes.
I think we all understand
something like
multiverse theory.
Yeah.
Then the problem with that is that still needs an origin as well. So the idea of infinite regress means that we need...
No, wait a second.
You don't understand. So
I know, because you're saying things that are incorrect. Multiverse theory does not need to have a beginning. You don't understand string theory. You don't understand multiverse. So I'm sorry, but when you say that, that just takes us back to the point where we have to explain that. No, it doesn't. The mathematics...
No, that's where I think you're wrong. I don't think anybody has demonstrated that anything such as an infinite regress of time and space can actually exist.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
No such demonstration has ever taken place.
All right. Well, how about this? Rather than just look at the question that obviously has no answer, I still feel like you're putting your God in as the answer to this question, you know, for really bad reasons. Why is God a better answer than I don't know? Because I legitimately do not know. I have no reason to say that it's a God. I have no reason to say it is negation's third grader. I have no reason to say any of it. That's why I have a purely atheistic view on that topic. The science is limited. So my question to you would be, what reasons do you have for putting your God in as the answer?
Yeah, well, as I wanted to go on and say before I was interrupted, is that actually what is going on here is that none of these are arguments to gaps. All of them are arguments to what we do know. So the predominant scientific theory is that the universe did have a beginning. That is just where the science is, so we have to deal with that. We also have to deal with the fact that the science is, and fine-tuning is not a synonym for design. It doesn't mean designed, it just means fine-tuning just means the combination of all of these constants had to be the values that they were. That's what the term means. So that's why non-theists, non-theistic physicists usually accept the term fine-tuning. They're okay with that. The existence of objective morality, these are all things that by and large people apart from serious skeptics or people on the fringes do genuinely believe. So the question is, rather than just staying now and saying, well, I don't know, now a thinking person has the duty of finding out, well, what is the best explanation of the existence of all of these things? And then they need to philosophically, they need to think about it. And what I'm suggesting is that a good reason for believing in God is that God is actually a very good hypothesis for all of these things existing. So as the famous Christian C.S. Lewis said, he said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And what Lewis goes on to say then is he makes the point that actually the existence of God helps to explain why these things are actually what they are. Do I need to believe that something can come from nothing? No, I find that irrational. I can't believe that. Can I hold to an infinite regress. No, I can't hold to that. So what are better alternatives? And for me personally, I think that the existence of God is a far superior rational alternative to having to try and come up with infinite regresses or something coming from nothing. So it's not that we're filling the gaps with what we don't know. We are making an inference to the best explanation.
All right.
And I think there's a difference between those two things. But of course, I also want to add, nobody is saying here, I'm certainly not saying, I don't think IP would be saying it, that someone is irrational if they don't believe what I believe. You see, this is the difference between my position personally and a lot of atheists that I meet on the internet. They feel that if you don't agree with their agnosticism or their atheism, then you are irrational in some way. And I'm not going that far. I'm not claiming that. But what I am saying is that I think that the best rational explanation for all of the data of the universe that we have, and the human nature and our existence, broader than science, so for example morality, I think the best single explanation of the data is the existence of God. And I find that to be a very powerful cumulative case for the existence of God.
All right.
Sorry, I've gone on far too long.
It's okay, no problem. I just want to come back and ask you, and maybe Inspiring Philosophy can come in on this as well. You said multiple times that you find it to be the best explanation, but you really didn't go into detail on why it is the best explanation. You went into detail about, all these things that we don't know, and how God is a better alternative for you at least, but you didn't really go into the actual reasons why God is that better alternative. If you and Inspiring can go into the actual reasons why God is the better alternative rather than we don't know, I would love to hear it.
Do you want to, IP, or?
You go first. I'll build on what you said.
Okay, well, I'll try and do it very briefly then. Okay, I mean, given that this is sort of a first time being on here, and you're asking broadly what is, why do you believe that God is a rational hypothesis? That's what I take to be the question here.
Yes.
What I'm trying to do is paint with a broad brush. So what then we would need to do, and what would take a far lot longer, would then be to go into some of these arguments. Well, why is it that God is a good explanation of a beginning of a universe? Why is it that God is a good explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe? Why is it that God is a good explanation for there being meaning, objective meaning in life? Why is it that God is a good argument for the foundation of objective morality? All of those things, and many other arguments as well, I would say, all of those arguments could then be explored, and I would suggest that in each case, I myself, at least as I investigate all of that data, I find that in each individual case, God again and again is the best explanation for why those things are the way they are and why people take them to exist the way they are.
Yeah, I understand that you see it as that, but again, my question would have to go back is why is it the ultimate answer rather than, we don't know. We don't know where the universe came from because, like I said, the Planck-time boundary issue. We don't know why the constants are the way they are because, again, that goes to the Planck-time boundary issue. You said that God is the better explanation, but you still have not given me the answer of why is the better. Let's just stick with the beginning of the universe for now. Why is God the best explanation for the beginning of the universe?
Okay, because the only other players out there. Sorry, I'm cutting in again. If that was IP, sorry. I'll be quick and then I'll finish. In the case of the beginning of the existence of time, you've mentioned the Planck boundary a couple of times, and I'm no physicist, but a physicist has told me that the Borguth-Vilenkin theory applies beyond that mathematical theory applies beyond the Planck time, and so that actually any universe which actually does exist mathematically, that their theory demonstrates that the universe would need to begin to exist. So it doesn't actually, saying Planck time doesn't solve this problem of the beginning of the universe. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that, as I say, the only other options that appear viable at the moment are to believe that there was either some eternal quantum state, and again, that has the problem of infinite regression. And that is a very serious mathematical problem. Now, if that gets solved, then I would have to turn around and say, well, I can't use a cosmological argument as evidence for my existence of God anymore, and I would have to reevaluate. But as things currently stand, and I only have an A-level education in mathematics, but I don't have a degree in it, but my mathematics is such that certainly mathematicians that I talk to, I can't find anybody who thinks that there actually could be a rational, actual infinite. Now, if that was demonstrated, that would then be a player. That would then be a contention against mine. But that doesn't seem to work. Either that, or you've got to break the metaphysical principle that from nothing, nothing comes. And I don't see, myself personally, maybe somebody could show it to me, but I can't see personally how you can break that metaphysical axiom of from nothing, nothing comes. And by nothing, we mean no thing whatsoever, nothing. Not, I'm not being ambiguous about my use of the word nothing there. So those, to me, as far as I can see, seem to be the two main players against the idea of there being some incredibly powerful being outside of space and time who actually caused our universe to exist. So that would be why I would see God as the more rational explanation of the beginning of the universe.
All right, I'm sure we'll come back to that. But I do want to give Inspiring Philosophy a chance. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think CT said anything I would really disagree with. I mean, when we evaluate where the universe came from, I mean, we're not arguing, well, we can't explain it, therefore God did it. We're looking at, like, what are the possible explanations for such a thing? And, one could say there was an infinite regress, and that is just something that just seems completely illogical. The idea that the universe just popped into existence from nothing is something that's also illogical. Now, it didn't pop into existence from a flux of energy. It popped into existence from nothing, as in the absence of energy, absence of matter, absence of time, absence of space, absence of everything. And so it just goes back to the idea that the only logical explanation is that this necessary existing being is the only logical conclusion. The idea of an infinite regress is illogical. The idea that the universe coming from nothing is completely illogical. The idea that the universe being created by abstract ideas is just also illogical. So, I wouldn't disagree with anything CT said there.
All right, then. Well, let me see if I can word this question right. I see that we're putting a characteristic on the beginning of the universe, that characteristic being the absence of space, the absence of time, the absence of matter, so on and so forth. There was just a blank. But as I said before, the blank time boundary does not allow us to study any further into the past, so we don't actually know if there was actually nothing or if there was actually something. We cannot know. And so the premises that we put on the cosmological argument are there simply because of what I would call blind faith. Now, of course, this was thrown out there as the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem. All that says is that the expansion of the universe had to have a beginning, but it does not say where that singularity came from. Now, of course, a singularity could have existed in the past and then exploded, and then the Van Guth-Vilenkin theorem takes effect, but it does not take effect before the Planck time. It just says that the expansion of the universe actually happened at a finite point in time. And if you were to play the clock backwards, it would confirm that by the background radiation. So, but I see that that this putting characteristics on the beginning of the universe, regardless what the Planck time boundary actually limits us to know. So I guess the question now is, how do you know that this was the actual environment of the beginning of the universe, being absence of everything?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is that appears to be what the cosmologists are telling us. Since, I mean, I don't think any of us are physicists in here, are we?
Yes,
is anyone a
one of us
professional physicist?
No, but that is my undergraduate.
Okay, so the problem that we have here is we're now going to get into a subject where actually none of us probably are top specialists, and I always want to be very, very wary of that. So anything we're now about to say is going to be appealing to authority, and we have to be upfront about that. But so for example, as I read, this is a standard textbook of cosmology in the UK here, An Introduction to Modern Cosmology by the cosmologist Andrew Liddell, who is not a theist, I would like to mention. And he says on page 113 of his introduction, he says, the most puzzling aspect of that, and he's talking about quantum tunneling, is that since time and space do not exist independently of the universe, the tunneling must be from nothing. And then he says, meaning not just empty space, but from a state where space and time had yet to exist. Now he then goes on through some very, very difficult mathematics, which I'm sure I do not grasp all of it, to then explain why it was actually metaphysically nothing. And as I say, I mean, you mentioned the singularity there. My understanding from reading Paul Davies is that the singularity is not a thing in itself. It's not a dot. It's not the little first tiny particle or whatever that existed. The singularity point is not a thing. It is a boundary. So the singularity is a way of talking about the boundary between there being no space and time, nothing, and there being something. So I think what we're saying is, if we're going to follow the evidence currently suggests, the main scientific theory is that the universe did actually come into being from nothing. So as I said before, and I won't go all back over it again, that's our starting place. Now I must ask myself, well, what is the best inference I can make? What is the best explanation? I am not arguing from a gap. What I am doing is I'm starting with what the scientists are telling me, and then I'm saying, okay, well, what is the best explanation of what the science currently says? But this is not an argument to what was the state prior to Planck time. This is not the argument at all. What we're suggesting is that scientists are telling us the universe had a genuine beginning, a real beginning. Time and space began to exist at the same moment, and that's the singularity boundary. Now, what do we do with that? And I'm not suggesting it's irrational to remain an atheist with that, but I would suggest there are some serious rational problems, and just for me, shrugging your shoulders and saying, well, we don't know, so I'm just going to put that up in the air, maybe you could do that with the beginning of the universe, but to me there comes a point where that becomes credulous. How often do I do that? Well, the universe also was fine-tuned. Well, we don't know yet, so I think I'll just hold my horses. And then, well, objective morality exists. Yes, I don't have a good explanation of that either, but, hopefully one day we will. For me personally, I think at some point you have to make an inference to the best explanation. And as I've said several times, I think that is rationally the best explanation is the existence of some kind of God.
All right,
Sorry,
then.
I feel like I'm harping on, so I will shut up for a bit.
It's okay, no problem. That's what this is for, to promote conversation. So if you got something to say, just say it. But I actually want to see if Inspiring Philosophy wants to say something, and then if Negation wants to go on, then you're more than welcome to. But Inspiring, do you got anything to add?
Well, yeah, just building upon that. I mean, it's not just, of course, well, one thing we don't know. It's several of these questions that we're asking here, and then it doesn't then, of course, as you mentioned earlier, doesn't prove right away that Yahweh or Jesus Christ is God. Then we then look at the evidence building upon that. Okay, if a necessary existing eternal being did do this, well, who and what about him? And then we start to evaluate the ontology of such a thing, or of such a being. So it's not really a question of, it's like, well, of this one little question we don't have. There's several questions here we're trying to answer. And the best inference, building on what CT said, is that this is God here. It's the best explanation.
All right then. I guess what I want to do now is, if Negation doesn't have anything else to say, I do have a little bit of an idea I want to throw out there. But
I would like to just make a couple of points real quick.
Go ahead.
Kind of just backing up a little bit and looking, I thought it was kind of interesting that you brought up the C.S. Lewis quote, in that, and then you built on that, basically saying that the best explanation, again, maybe I'm missing it, but still don't understand why that's the best explanation and why my third grader is not as good an explanation, but again, we can get past that, and demonstrating that God is the light that shows us the way, when we have multiple examples throughout history, which not only is God erroneous in his description of the universe, but also retarded our understanding of what our view of the world is. And in the same way that you want to take inference that this is the best explanation because, like you said, argument from authority, and our scientists say this, we should, if we would have remained with that thought process, we would still think the Earth is flat. There are gods pulling the sun across the sky, because since we have no way of knowing anything beyond whatever the technology at that time affords us, or the mathematics, and there aren't people out there that would challenge these thoughts, we would be stuck there. So that's kind of where I'm having a problem. You're trying to use deductive reasoning, which I applaud you on, but to me, I would liken it to coming home and finding my house has been robbed and somehow inferring that Satan popped into existence and took all of my stuff rather than looking for fingerprints. So,
Well,
Yeah, can I? Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, I would say that seems to be. I mean, you talk about how we would still be living in like this flat, thinking the Earth is flat. Well, I mean, we're not saying that, that there's not more evidence out there that could come into, we could find later. We're saying, based on what we know now, it's not saying, well, in the future we'll figure this out kind of thing. It's with the Earth being flat. I mean, that's a different subject altogether. I think it could easily be argued from history that not many Europeans thought that. But
you're right, but
yeah,
all of the Mediterranean did 2,000 years ago.
Well, moving on from that, I don't want to get stuck on that. It's based on what they knew, they could draw that conclusion, but more evidence came out, which of course changed their conclusions. And so that's why I don't think it relates to the topic of God right now. Because
yeah, it does, because God was dragged kicking and screaming, and the church in general was dragged kicking and screaming, saying that all of these are wrong. We have examples of that today with evolution.
Well,
so
first of all, CT and I both are not young Earth creationists.
I'm not trying. Yeah, and I'm not trying to put that label on you. I'm just saying.
Building on that was some members of the church. That wasn't God being dragged kicking and screaming. That was people and their opinions.
No, it was scientific evidence that was being blocked. Again, just so I'm being clear, I'm not trying to say that you guys are attempting to block knowledge or anything like that. But what I'm saying is you've repeatedly said, I have no idea how many times, that this is the best explanation. And when we try to get to the core of that, it seems like all you reiterate is it's the best explanation. And it's the same thing as saying the best explanation for the sun rising is because Apollo was pulling it across the sky in his horses and chariots. I just don't see why how you don't see the correlation there.
Yeah, okay. Because there's a disanalogy, that's why. Because things like thunder and lightning and the seas, etc., they have natural explanations. There are good explanations to explain those things without making any inference directly to there being God involved in those things. However, your disanalogy is that then to suggest that that's what we're doing with these arguments, but there is no well-agreed natural explanation for the existence of objective morality. One of the reasons that's easily demonstratable is because atheist philosophers themselves disagree on what the answer to that is. They have not come up with a theory which they have agreed on is a good, solid foundation for objective morality. There is no natural known cause of how nothing can become something. There is no natural known cause that would cause the Big Bang in the first moment of his existence to be exactly the right intensity for a fine-tuned universe to exist. So you're creating a disanalogy. I also want to pick up on some revisionist history going on here as well, because the church was not dragged kicking and screaming by the theory of evolution in the 19th century whatsoever. I understand how it might appear that way to someone living in North America today, but that is not the case when you actually look at the history. The majority of geologists in the 19th century were Anglicans. Most of the people who were geologists in the UK at that time already knew that the world was thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years old, and they were not dragged kicking and screaming whatsoever. Also, before that, 1700 years prior to Darwin, Augustine had already pointed out that it was completely invalid to read Genesis chapter 1 in a literal way, in any way whatsoever. So certainly it's reconstructing history to suggest that the church in the 19th century had to go through some huge paradigm shift in order to embrace evolution. That is not the case whatsoever. And the historian Ronald Numbers has pointed out that the origins of creationism are very much a 20th century thing, building on Bishop Ussher in the 16th century. So there's some revisionist history being chucked in here, which I don't like.
Wait a second. Let me be clear. If I misspoke and led you to believe that I was specifically talking about evolution, I apologize. What I meant kicking and screaming was more Copernicus, Galileo, those type of kicking and screaming. I don't think that's revisionist in any way, shape, or form. And then let's go back to you're saying that, the evidence that we now have leads us to well, and the reason that it is analogous is because it's the exact same argument that would have been used 2,000 years ago by theists back then to explain lightning, to explain a superheated plasma coming from, as far as they're concerned, coming without any causation from the cloud to strike whatever, setting it ablaze and and going into, whatever. They had no way of knowing that. So in the exact same way that we don't know past X, wherever you want to say as far as the beginning of the universe, they didn't know how lightning was generated, how the sun rose. So it is analogous. It's exactly the same type of methodology employed.
Yeah, the dangerous thing about the direction you're going is you're about to seriously undermine your own appeal to science and rationality, because you're about to suggest that just because scientists got it wrong in the past and they didn't know the explanation to things means that we can doubt today what scientists are actually telling us, and that actually the data today is seriously in doubt because what might be found in the future might undermine it. But that undermines an argument for anything. That undermines evolution. This is an argument that creationists use a lot when I talk to them. They say to me, oh, look at all the mistakes scientists have made in the past. What they'll do then is they'll say, well, scientists today, are they still imperfect? Yes. Are there still gaps in the theory? Yes. Well then, in the future, maybe the theory of evolution will be overthrown. This is the kind of argument they use all the time to doubt modern science.
And what you don't understand is I am more than willing to go down that road, because I applaud them for making that observation. That is exactly how science works. That's exactly when anyone puts something up for peer review, they beg to be done. We want to be shown wrong. We want to be, if evolution in fact there is some evidence that shows that it's not correct, by all means, we want it to be wrong. If for some reason the standard model is completely taken apart, even after supposedly finding the Higgs, we want it to be demonstrated that way. So yes, I will go there, and I hope that's how it is. On the other hand, when you go to the theorist side, the theological side, it's the exact opposite. Nothing can be challenged. That's the flaw. That's the dangerous road.
Well, if
Well,
nothing can
sorry,
be
go ahead.
challenged, then why are we having this conversation now? It's kind
No,
of
no, no.
like well, it's
No,
kind of like
we meant being challenged from the theist side. When I forget who it was again. I'm not a big history buff on it, but when somebody suggested that the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around, wasn't he executed?
Are you speaking of Galileo?
I guess that's the guy's name. That's what he's actually saying. It was when you went to the theist side and you explained, hey, the whole Adam and Eve story, I don't think it really explains everything. I have this new thing called evolution, and here's all my evidence backing it up. You can't do that now. When you go down that road, you're looked as like a sinner, something that doesn't believe in God, or it automatically gets
Hold
equated
on.
with atheism.
Well, hold on. I mean that's you're kind of saying, well, I've had these experiences with people where they've done this to me, and that's kind of it's kind of unfair to say, well, that's how they all are. I mean, not everyone is going to be like that. I mean, Galileo he was not an atheist. He didn't reject the idea of God. When the church rejected his teachings, this was not like atheist versus theism back then. This was a theist with a scientific theory going against other theists with other scientific theories, and of course, some of the church did not take the right move on that. No one's going to argue against that. But I'm kind of confused on how you're saying that. Oh, because some of these people will reject evolution or science. I don't understand what you're trying to get at with that. I mean, maybe if you do, CT, I'm confused on where he's trying to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, the thing with Galileo as well is not only are there quite a few myths told about the story of Galileo, it's far more complicated than we're going to actually get to in this program. And actually, there were Protestant scientists like Beekman, for example, who supported Galileo, and so it's far more complicated than just that. And then historians have pointed out that there was a big bust-up of egos between the Pope at that time and Galileo. So the story's far more complicated, but myths have been made up about him being tortured, which aren't true. There's no historical evidence he was tortured, and the house arrest he was put under was just that he had to live in his very luxurious villa, which is where he then lived and did most of his exciting scientific findings in the rest of his in those last few years. So
Yeah, I'm not going on the history.
Going on there.
Yeah, I'm not going on the history. Like I said, I'm not a big history buff on this. That I didn't even know the guy's name who was burnt at the stake. The only thing that I was saying is that when you look at everything that we're doing, all the modern day advances that we're doing, is that when you had lightning, and they try to make an explanation for that, they would say, oh, I'm just going to pick one out of the sky, Zeus, for example. Oh, that is Zeus. He is making that lightning strike. Well, if you said, actually, no, it's the friction, within the clouds causing a magnetic charge, which then sparks a lightning strike, which has temperatures higher than the surface of the sun. Do you really think they would have bought that? Do you think they would have really have said, let's actually investigate that, or would you just say, no, you're a blasphemer then? That's what we're saying, is that when you put everything, this is why we say God, kicking and screaming. We're using that as a synonym for people who want to try and put God as a possible answer for everything, even if we actually do have another answer that actually answers the question better than God.
Well, building back on the God thing, I mean, we were mentioning earlier, especially CT, that there really isn't any other good explanations. I mean, back then they could have argued it was my God, and there was, in a primitive society, and they would have had these other alternative explanations. But then, of course, thousands of years later, scientists came in and he said, we have the best explanation based on evidence. And what we're saying now is, based on the evidence, this is the best explanation for what we have. If there are other alternative theories which have good supporting evidence, then we would probably consider them. But I don't understand how you could say that they're the same thing.
Well, the reason why I say is that I equate it to lightning strike just like I would equate it to the beginning of the universe. At one point, we did not know what caused lightning. And we can compare that to this point. We don't know what caused that Planck-time boundary to expand to the universe we see today. We simply do not know. So I guess knowing what you know now about lightning, would you say that if I said at the time that lightning was caused by God's wrath striking down somebody who sinned and burning their house to the ground, would you say that me making that claim, that positive claim, and not wanting to get rid of it, would you say that is a bad position to be in? Or better yet, let me ask you this, which one's better? Claiming to know something that we do not know of, such as lightning strike back in the day, or just claiming I don't know what causes it? What is a better position to have in that case?
Do you want to go, CT? I've been talking a little bit.
Okay. I would come back to my point that I don't think that we have a genuine analogy here, because I want to come back to the point that I had stated, that these arguments are based not on what we don't know, they are based on what we do know. And what we do appear to know is that the universe began to exist. What we do seem to know even stronger than that, which would come back to the teleological argument, is we do know that there was an extraordinary amount of fine-tuning that needed to take place in the Big Bang for our universe to exist in the state that it currently does. Now, these are things that we do know. And now what we're doing is we're not suggesting, I think this is part of the confusion, is that the God hypothesis here is not just a scientific hypothesis. We are not suggesting that God is the scientific answer necessarily to all of these questions. For example, Robin Collins is a Christian who's a physicist and a philosopher, and he actually builds a teleological argument on the possibility of a strong possibility of there being a multiverse. And so I don't feel I need to make a claim that there was no multiverse. What I'm suggesting is that God is the best explanation regardless of what that scenario was. And certainly the only other tenable position would be an eternal universe. And I've already stated there's good arguments, reductio arguments, to suggest that actually there can't be any such thing as an actual infinite. So what is actually going on here is we're not suggesting God is a God of the gaps. That's not the argument here whatsoever. Rather, these arguments are saying this is the data that we do know. And what we are responsible for is the data in front of us, right? We can't second guess where science is going to go in the future. And it might well be that in the future science makes it so that it demonstrates that God is not a very likely hypothesis whatsoever. I have to remain open to that. All I can be responsible for is acknowledging what scientists tell me today. And I think I just want to make the point that the idea of God is not just a scientific theory. Now, of course, I'm not going in the direction of Stephen Jay Gould here and the NOMA thing and saying God and science or philosophy and science never overlap or interact. Of course they do. If you draw a Venn diagram, there's overlap. Clearly there is. But the God hypothesis is not a purely scientific hypothesis. The God hypothesis is also a personal one. And so what I would like to suggest is what I think myself and IPEA are suggesting tonight is that actually it makes sense that the universe in all of these areas, morality, the fine-tuning, the existence of anything at all, are best explained both by what science tells us and by some kind of personal agent as well, an agent of causation, not just the material stuff. And that's the position I want to make clear. God is not supplanting science here. What I'm saying is I'm not aware of any mainstream scientific theory that I don't hold to and agree to. What I'm saying as well is I don't think that's enough. So I'm not filling the scientific void with with God. What I'm suggesting is that actually to have a fuller, profound explanation of the universe, God as a personal agent needs to be in there as well. And that is a philosophical explanation for all of those questions, not just scientific ones. And I just finished with a point that John Lennox makes. He uses this analogy quite a bit when he's speaking, and he says, if you were asked what is the explanation for there being a Ford motor vehicle, you would not say that it's anti-scientific to suggest that there was someone called Henry Ford in that process. That would not be anti-scientific. That would be a fuller explanation. Science can only explain that Ford automobile to a certain degree, but there is also a personal explanation to the fact that Ford cars exist, and that is the person of Henry Ford. And so it's not anti-scientific to suggest that there is also a personal cause that helps explain more fully the existence of the data.
All right, then, how about this? I see this going to the point where we're actually going to start beating a dead horse here. It's going to go right back on itself. So how about this? I actually want to flip it around for a sec. Now I understand that me and Negation were asking a lot of questions. So how about to clear up some of the confusion there might be with you guys, with us, or whatever, how about you guys think of a really provocative questions for us, and then we'll do, as atheists, what we can to answer them for you.
Okay, I actually had something building on that, actually. I was...
Hey, guys, could I, real quick, I'm going to have to be out of here in about 10 minutes. I hate to cut this off. Sorry.
Actually,
That's all right. We'll ask you first.
That's great. Please do. I just wanted to give you all a heads up. So
I got to be out of here in about a half hour anyways, too, so I understand. Basically, from what it seems to me is that you're arguing that we are believing in a God of gaps, and it would make more sense just to appeal that in the future, people will discover this, kind of like how we've discovered the answers to questions in the past. But to me, it seems like that's arguing for your own God of the gaps. It's like, well, we can't figure it out now, therefore people in the future will figure it out for us. And that kind of seems like, you're kind of forcing your arguments are kind of like of defeating themselves in almost a sense. So I would like to hear you possibly respond on something like that. If you're going to argue that we are filling God in with the gaps, aren't you not filling in the gaps yourself with saying, well, we don't know, but people in the future will know, and that's good enough for us?
And I think that assessment's fairly accurate. I think you're really on track with that. I think where it differs, I think the reason that, at least personally, I feel that our position is a little more valid, if you want to stretch it to that, is because not only just as I believe I'm alive because I can feel, the wind in my face, if you want to get to that type of deal, but I also feel that you're right. We will sooner or later come to a very good understanding of why the universe exists, how it got here, but that's based on the evidence, and my evidence would be historical. Every time thus far that there has been something that we don't know, we haven't been able to figure out why it works, and even something as mysterious as lightning. I mean, if you think of the essence of lightning and you had never seen it before, it's pretty impressive. I mean, there's a cloud, and then all of a sudden there's, this very energetic phenomenon that literally will strike you dead for no reason. I can see why people would think that's God. Now, every time thus far that we've had something like that, science has demonstrated that there is a natural cause for it. And I would say that's why, at least personally, I have the faith, if you want to call it that, which I have no problems calling it that people in the future will be able to surmise these things that we're questioning right now. Does that help?
It makes me, well, of course there's things I want to say, but I want to give CT a chance to follow up on that.
Yep, ask away, really. CT, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You just went pause there for a second. But yeah, ask away. Ask any question.
Yeah, I mean, so if I understand, I mean, I guess I just really want to ask what position you guys are taking, because it doesn't seem to be like what would be described as a traditionally atheistic position at all. What we seem to have here is a very agnostic position. So as far as I understand you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and do say something about this, you don't seem to be suggesting that theism is an irrational position. What you're suggesting is that you are completely agnostic about the question of God's existence. Is that a fair representation for where you both are?
As far as me personally, I think I would liken it to, if you want to use a scale. I think it was Dawkins that did this. If I'm on a scale of 1 to 7, I'm definitely a 6. So I don't know if that fits your definition, but by definition, if I'm going to be honest and I'm going to approach this from my understanding of the rules of logic and rationality, I guess, if you will, I can never take a hardline approach that I know there is no God. At the same time, saying that it's rational to believe in God, I wouldn't make that leap either. I would say it's more rational to take what we know, coupled with how history has progressed in the past, and since we used science as our springboard here, look at science in the past in the same way, and realize that if we are going to draw an inference from that, deductive reasoning, we have to conclude that we as a species have constantly got farther and farther and farther away from supernatural explanations. To me, the end result of that, taken to an extreme, should result in the negation of supernatural explanations for anything.
Well, I would probably want to follow that with,
Hang on, Inspiring. The question was for both of us.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay. Then you're free to go on. But I'll go ahead and answer with this. I could really care less what label a person puts on me. If they wish to call me an agnostic, then they're more than welcome to. If they wish to call me an atheist, then they're more than welcome to. The thing that I want to make clear is my position on things. And the best way that I define it is the fork in the road. If one road says God does exist and another road says God does not exist, like I said, I'm not going down either road. Now, because I haven't been convinced on which one is the right path to take. So whether you call that position, me staying at the fork, not going down either road, agnosticism, or if you call it atheism, I really don't care. It's when you actually understand my position that I'm more concerned about. For all intents and purposes, I call myself an atheist, simply because of the explanation that Matt Dillahunty gives in defining atheism. And since that's what some people, or most of them, I should say, hold to as the actual definition of atheist, and in some actual dictionaries you can see atheism is just a synonym for agnosticism, you can call me both and I'll be just as fine with it. I'm not claiming to know that God does not exist. I'm also not claiming to know that God does exist. I'm basically saying that I do not know, and I'm man enough to admit that I do not know, and this is why I have these conversations, to try and see if there is anything that could open my eyes to either an obvious fact or an unobvious fact. It's just all about the conversation for me. But as far as the label you wish to put on me, it's open house. Call me what you will.
Right, okay, guys, with that, I've kind of got to bow out. I can give y'all about 30 seconds if y'all want to respond. I'm really up against the wall, though, so I really apologize. But I think IP wanted to say something real quick. If you definitely want to, please hit me.
No problem.
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's just if I were to give an analogy, if I say I caught a rabbit today, that doesn't mean I'm going to catch a rabbit tomorrow. Just because we have found natural explanations for things like lightning doesn't mean we're going to find a natural explanation for the universe tomorrow. That seems like a non sequitur almost. It's not, doesn't really add up. I mean, there's several questions that have existed for thousands of years that still God is the best explanation for, and still the evidence does point to God.
Such as? I mean, that's good. Again, guys, I think we need to, I mean, I'm very curious, and it's killing me that I got to leave now. I'd love to do this for the next 3 hours, and I know that springboard, that little, will get us until midnight. So I've got to go for a couple of hours. I'm more than willing. I know you guys are, it's way late, especially with you, Cartesian. It's way late where you're at, but I would love to do this again. Sorry I have to bow out, but I don't have a choice right now. So,
No worries.
all right, thanks again. And either one of you guys, you want to add me to Skype and just hit me up and we can talk, feel free. I mean, I hope you realize I'm not going to be combative or try to belittle you. I am a lot like Redline. I just have questions, and the questions for the last 25 plus years have led me to, I'm not finding anything. I lived as a quasi-theist, I guess, for about 20 years, and 25 plus years now, it's going the other way. So anyway, but I got to get out of here. So thanks again, guys. I'll talk to y'all later.
See you,
Cheers.
Nation. All right, guys. I guess what we'll do is we'll just continue with here. I have no problem with just it being you two and me talking here, so we can go ahead and continue. But if you guys had any other questions that you would like to propose to me, we can go ahead and continue. Nothing at all?
You can go ahead, CT. I was just talking.
Yeah, I had one and now it's gone out of my head.
Oh yeah, in America we call that a brain fart. Okay, well,
Okay.
how about I break the ice a little bit and just explain a little thing about my position and such, and then maybe that'll spark something. My position is that not of assuming. I prefer not to assume, because the way it is that you make an ass out of you and me assume, and I just don't feel like going down that road, because I think assumptions are really the wrong way to come to the actual answers that govern our world and our universe. When we talk about, why a person is sick or why they have headaches, you could assume that it's just a regular migraine. But in all actuality, it could be, a tumor in the brain that would kill them next week. And this actually happened with a neighbor of mine. They assumed it was nothing, didn't go to a doctor, and that ended up killing them. So I prefer to go away from assumptions and try to look at everything. If something doesn't seem right, I think it's actually imperative that we, try to, get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and I applaud that kind of attitude. I think that's kind of what led me to becoming a theist. I mean, in the UK here, I mean, most people are either completely apathetic about the question of God's existence, or they are atheists. I would say, whatever the statistics tell you, I would say in my experience of living in this country for nearly 4 decades, roughly maybe about 1 in 10 people you meet will either be happy to talk about the existence of God or will claim to have some kind of religious belief. So that's just my own experience.
Nice.
So I grew up in a household where my parents were not interested in religion, and my father was very much opposed to religion because of some bad experiences he'd had with the church in the past. So it really wasn't until I got to nearly into my 20s, where I went to university, that I really decided I needed to think about this for myself and not just adopt my parents' atheism. I had some serious questions that I wanted answered, and it was that exploration of trying to find answers, trying to make sense of the world that I was living in, which led me toward theism, which is so. I'm just saying that because that sounds very similar to what you're saying about being on a journey, being on a quest, and I think that's true of all of us.
Then I believe that what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to end the show on that note. We're more than welcome to continue the conversation. I'm just going to stop the recording on my end. Now here's what I'm going to do. Because we went way over the time limit, I will have to do some editing to this video, but not to worry. You all have the right to the raw, unedited file file of this recording, and you're more than welcome to use it as you wish. Cartesian, I expect you to make a video using this recording. Does that sound like a plan?
I hadn't intended to, but I can do.
Yeah, and inspiring, it's the same deal for you. I do not want to, make a video about a conversation we have and it only go one way, or them only have half the story. You are also more than welcome to the raw recording of this conversation, and you're free to use it however you want. And so I just want to throw that out there, and I also want to thank both of you, really much for coming on here, and I hope you see it as nothing more than a purely enjoyable conversation about a very hotly debated topic.
Yeah, I thought it was really great.
Really great. Cartesian?
Yeah, really good. I would like to see it as the start of a dialogue and not an ending. It's a little frustrating in places where we seem to be going around slightly in circles, but maybe that's the fact that, it's just the nature of Skype, I think, and we don't actually know each other. Even IP and I don't really know each other in the sense of, knowing each other as people. We've had some exchanges and some conversations on YouTube and so on, but I think all of that doesn't help. It's a real shame we can't sit down in a cafe somewhere around a drink, because it's very hard to read people. I think a lot of communication is physical, isn't it? So you need to see the expression on the faces. I could kind of hear Negation of Peace sighing sometimes, so I knew that was a frown. But
Yeah.
it is quite artificial, and I think that probably leads to some miscommunication and so on. But as a first dialogue, I thought it was good, and I'd like to applaud you for being willing to change the time to let IP and me come on, because there are some other atheist shows out there that won't do that for you.
Oh yeah, that's the thing we want. We want to do. We want to make it as open as possible, and I really do thank you. Like I said, if you guys want the raw recording to this conversation, all you have to do is ask, and I'll send it as a file transfer over Skype, and then you're free to use the audio as you wish.
All right,
right.
great. I appreciate that.
All right, good. Then with that, I'm going to have to leave. I do apologize, but I will have to leave. People have been bugging me on the other line, but I cannot thank you guys enough for being on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Cheers.
All right. Have a good night.